Imagine a city where roads don't exist, where land is scarce, and fresh water is a luxury. Picture a place built on over 100 tiny islands, connected by bridges and woven together by canals. This is Venice, a city that rose from the mud and transformed into one of the most powerful and wealthy metropolises of its time. How did a group of refugees fleeing the Huns create a city that would stand the test of time? This is the story of the crazy engineering of Venice. The year was 452 and the Roman Empire was crumbling. The Huns, led by Attila, were sweeping through northern Italy, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. As cities fell, the locals had no choice but to flee. Their destination was a lagoon off the coast, dotted with small, marshy islands. These refugees, against all odds, laid the foundations for what would become one of the most impressive engineering feats the world has ever seen. The islands were little more than marshy patches of land, made up of soft clay that could barely support a person, let alone an entire city. To create stable foundations, they turned to an ingenious solution: timber piles. These large wooden stakes were sourced from the dense forests of Croatia and driven deep into the ground. The Venetians hammered these piles until they reached a much firmer layer of clay, about 5 meters below the surface. This method did more than just stabilize the piles. It also compressed the surrounding clay, squeezing out water and increasing the soil's strength. But the real genius lay in how they preserved these wooden piles. By packing them tightly together and sealing them off from the air, the Venetians ensured that the wood wouldn't rot. Once the timber piles were securely in place, the tops were cut off, and wooden planks were laid on top to spread the load. The next step was to place special blocks of Istrian stone, a dense and water-resistant limestone, on top of the wooden planks. These stones raised the foundations above the water, protecting the buildings from floods. This design was nothing short of a masterstroke. The timber piles, now hidden beneath layers of wood and stone, were preserved from decay, and to this day, they continue to hold up the city. With stable foundations in place, the next step was to build the city itself. Initially, the Venetians constructed their homes from wood, a logical choice given the abundance of timber. However, wood proved to be a double-edged sword. While it was easy to work with, it was also highly flammable, and several devastating fires forced the Venetians to rethink their approach. Brick became the material of choice, offering both durability and fire resistance. But building with brick presented its own challenges. The soft, marshy ground meant that the buildings had to be kept as light as possible. To achieve this, most Venetian buildings were limited to just 3 stories. Moreover, the buildings had to be flexible enough to move with the ground as it shifted over time. To accomplish this, the Venetians used lime mortar instead of cement. Lime mortar is more flexible, allowing the buildings to flex slightly without cracking as the ground beneath shifts. This flexibility was crucial in a city built on such unstable terrain. The Venetians didn't stop at using lightweight materials. They also developed innovative construction techniques to ensure the stability of their buildings. The inner walls were built in a crisscross pattern, similar to a trellis, allowing them to flex and move with the shifting ground. The facades, which were often adorned with large windows and ornate stone designs, were much heavier. To prevent these facades from toppling over, they were pinned into the ground using iron rods, keeping the entire structure together. This method of construction worked remarkably well, and soon several islands around the lagoon were dotted with these sturdy brick buildings. This method of construction worked so well that the Venetians quickly expanded their city. But instead of spreading outward as most cities do, Venice expanded inward. The islands grew closer together, and as they did, the need for better connectivity between them became apparent. In its early days, Venice was a city of islands, with boats being the primary mode of transportation between them. But as the population grew and commerce flourished, the need for a more efficient way to connect the islands became urgent. Surprisingly, it wasn't until 500 years after its founding that Venice saw its first bridge. The first attempt at bridging Venice was a simple pontoon bridge that connected 2 of the largest sections of the city. This bridge provided a vital link to Rialto, the financial heart of Venice, and was a crucial development in the city's evolution. However, as the city continued to grow, a more permanent solution was needed. So, the Doge of Venice, recognizing the importance of a reliable bridge, offered a prize for the best bridge design. This led to the construction of a wooden bridge, which, while more durable than the pontoon, eventually succumbed to fire and decay. It was finally replaced by a much stronger stone bridge. To build this stone bridge, over 12,000 timber piles were driven into the banks of the canal, providing a sturdy foundation. On top of these piles, 10,000 tons of stone were laid to form the bridge itself. This structure, now known as the Rialto Bridge, still stands today, a testament to the engineering prowess of the Venetians. Following the success of the Rialto Bridge, stone bridges began to appear all over Venice, transforming the city into a tightly knit network of canals and bridges. This unique layout gave Venice a significant advantage. The canals allowed goods and people to move quickly and efficiently through the city, while the separation of walkways and canals eliminated the congestion seen in other medieval cities. Despite being surrounded by water, Venice faced a significant problem. All that water was salty and undrinkable. With no natural springs or rivers on the islands, the Venetians had to get creative to meet the city's growing demand for fresh water. Initially, fresh water was brought in by boat from the mainland, but as Venice's population swelled to over 170,000, this method became unsustainable. The Venetians needed a solution that would allow them to collect and store fresh water locally. The answer lay in the city's squares. Each Venetian island was built around the central square, which initially served as a communal space for grazing animals. The Venetians realized that these squares could be repurposed to collect rainwater. They began by digging out large basins beneath the squares and lining the walls with a thick layer of clay to make them waterproof. The basins were then filled with sand and stones, creating a natural filtration system. The surface of the square was paved with tiles that sloped towards the corners, directing rainwater into the basins. But the Venetians didn't stop there. They also fitted the roofs of nearby buildings with gutters that channeled rainwater onto the squares and into the drains. This system turned the entire city into a massive rainwater collection funnel, filling more than 600 wells scattered throughout Venice. This ingenious solution not only provided the city with a reliable supply of fresh water, but also demonstrated the Venetians' ability to turn every challenge into an opportunity for innovation. As Venice grew, so did the amount of waste produced by its residents. In the early days, most waste was simply tossed out of windows, with some of it landing in the canals. For those living further from the water, waste ended up in the streets, creating unsanitary conditions. By the 16th century, it was clear that Venice needed a more effective waste management system. The solution was as innovative as it was practical. A network of underground tunnels that would collect waste from every building and flush it into the canals. Here's how it worked. When the tide in the lagoon was low, solid waste would settle at the bottom of the tunnels, while liquids would flow into the canals. Then, when the tide rose, the tunnels would flood, pulling the solid waste into the canals. The natural motion of the tides, which came in and out twice a day, acted like a flushing mechanism, exchanging the dirty water for fresh water from the sea. Furthermore, the salt water in the canals served as a powerful disinfectant, helping to keep the city clean and reducing the spread of disease. This system was remarkably effective and remained in use for centuries. Today, Venice remains an architectural wonder, a city that has stood the test of time thanks to the ingenuity and determination of its founders. The bridges, canals, and buildings are all ancient relics, sitting atop a forest of timber piles that have supported the city for over 1,000 years. Venice's engineering feats were not just a product of necessity. They were a result of visionary thinking that was way ahead of its time and an unyielding commitment to overcoming the challenges of its environment. The Venetians didn't just build a city, they created a masterpiece of urban design, one that continues to inspire and amaze people around the world.